The fork clattered against my plate, breaking the silence that had fallen over my birthday dinner. My 57th birthday. A day that should have been filled with joy and celebration, but instead became the moment my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "What did you just say?" I whispered, my voice barely audible as I stared at my son Calvin across the table. He didn't even flinch. Those cold eyes I once rocked to sleep, eyes I wiped tears from throughout childhood, looked right through me as if I were nothing. I said, "The best gift would be if you just disappeared, Mom." Calvin's voice was calm, detached. "Bianca and I have been talking. You're always hovering, always trying to be part of my life. It would be easier for everyone if you weren't around at all." The beautiful dinner I'd spent all day preparing suddenly looked blurry through my tears. Honey-glazed chicken, his favorite since he was 10. Sweet potato pie made from my grandmother's recipe. An expensive bottle of wine I'd saved 3 months to afford. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. "I'm your mother," was all I could manage to say. He shrugged, checking his watch. "Yeah, well, I didn't ask to be born." Those words. Those horrible, cruel words from the lips of the baby I'd nursed, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, the young man whose education I'd paid for by working double shifts until my feet bled. I excused myself, walked to the bathroom on legs that felt like they might collapse, and locked the door. As I caught my reflection in the mirror, the new wrinkles around my eyes, the gray hairs I hadn't had time to color, a single thought kept repeating: when did my son start hating me? 20 minutes later, I heard the front door slam. He hadn't even said goodbye. That night, alone in my bedroom, I pulled out the old photo albums. Calvin's first steps. His high school graduation. The day he got his college acceptance letter. How proud I'd been. How I'd believed all my sacrifices had been worth it. What would you do if your only child told you they wished you'd disappear? If the person you gave up everything for looked at you like you were nothing but an inconvenience? As tears soaked my pillow, my mind raced through years of memories. The double shifts at the hospital. The meals I skipped so he could eat. The loans I took out in my name to fund his education. All the love I'd poured into him, seemingly vanished into thin air. That night, as dawn broke through my curtains and my eyes burned from crying, I made a decision that would change everything between us forever. I didn't start out planning to be a single mother. But life rarely follows our plans, does it? I was 20 years old when Calvin was born, barely more than a child myself. His father, Jerome, had promised me the world. A home, a family, stability. All the things my own childhood had lacked. Then the reality of midnight feedings and endless crying hit, and Jerome couldn't handle it. He packed his bags before Calvin's first birthday, leaving nothing but overdue bills and a half-paid crib I was still making payments on. "I need to find myself," he said, as if his self was more important than the tiny human we'd created together. That night, holding my son against my chest as he slept, I made him a promise. "You'll never want for anything," I whispered, brushing my lips against his soft hair. "Mommy will make sure of it." And I meant it. Every word. The early years were the hardest. I worked as a nursing assistant while studying to become a registered nurse. My neighbor, Mrs. Parker, watched Calvin when she could, but daycare took most of my paycheck. I survived on ramen noodles and coffee, often going to bed hungry so there would be enough food for Calvin's breakfast. Have you ever had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying your child new shoes? Between filling a prescription or putting gas in your car to get to work? These weren't occasional dilemmas for me, they were my daily reality. When Calvin was 7, I started working double shifts at the hospital. Sometimes I'd work 36 hours straight, coming home only to shower and change before heading back. My feet would swell so badly I had to buy shoes a size larger. My hands cracked and bled from constant washing and glove changes. But when I'd drag myself home, exhausted beyond words, and see Calvin's face light up as I walked through the door, it all seemed worth it. "Mommy, look what I made you," he'd say, holding up a drawing or a craft from school. Those moments kept me going. Through the missed parent-teacher conferences because I couldn't get time off. Through the birthdays when I could only afford a small cake and a single present. Through the cold winters when I'd layer my son in warm clothes while I shivered in a thin coat that had seen better days. By the time Calvin reached high school, things had improved somewhat. I was finally a registered nurse with better pay, though the hours remained brutal. Calvin was smart, so smart. His teachers told me he could go to college, become anything he wanted. "Your son has real potential, Miss Harris," they'd say. He could get scholarships. But the scholarships didn't cover everything. Not the application fees, the campus visits, the housing deposits, the textbooks, the meal plans. So I took out loans, in my name, not his. I refinanced the house I'd finally managed to buy. I picked up weekend shifts in the ER, the shifts nobody wanted. The violent nights, the holiday weekends, the understaffed disaster shifts. Also Calvin could attend a university that would open doors for him. "Mom, you don't have to do all this," he said once, during his sophomore year, when he caught me sorting medical bills at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. "I want to," I told him. "This is what mothers do." Have you ever given everything to someone only to be treated like nothing? Have you poured your heart, soul, and every last penny into another person's future? I remember the day Calvin graduated college with crystal clarity. I sat in the audience, wearing a dress I'd bought secondhand but carefully steamed. My hands were rough, my nails short and practical, but I clapped until they hurt when they called his name. Calvin Harris, Bachelor of Finance, cum laude. My baby. My reason for everything. He looked so handsome in his cap and gown, so grown up. As he accepted his diploma, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over me. This was it. This was what all those sleepless nights and skipped meals had been for. This was worth it. I thought my sacrifices had paid off. That now, finally, we could have the relationship I'd always dreamed of, two adults who respected and loved each other. Maybe he'd even help me retire someday, let me rest these tired bones. I had no idea the real pain was just beginning. If you've ever sacrificed everything for someone you love, drop a heart in the comments. I need to know I'm not alone in this. The change in Calvin was so gradual, I almost didn't notice it happening. Almost. It started with his first job after graduation. I waited for the phone call, the excited voice telling me he'd been hired at the financial firm he'd interviewed with. I imagined sending flowers to his new office, maybe taking him out to celebrate. But the call never came. Instead, I discovered my son's career milestone through Facebook, a photo of him in a crisp navy suit, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by people I'd never seen before. The caption read, "First day at Wilson & Marsh Financial Complete. #career goals." I stared at that photo for a long time, my finger hovering over the like button. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it away. He's busy, I told myself. He's an adult now. He doesn't need to tell his mother everything. I called him that night, trying to sound casual. "Congratulations on the new job, sweetheart. I saw on Facebook. Why didn't you tell me?" There was a pause, then, "It's not a big deal, Mom. Just a starting position." "Well, I'm proud of you. Maybe I could come visit your office sometime." His voice cooled noticeably. "That's not really appropriate, Mom. It's a professional environment." As if I wouldn't know how to behave in a professional environment. Me, who had worked in hospitals for over 30 years. The weeks turned into months. My calls went to voicemail more often than not. When Calvin did answer, Our conversations became shorter, more perfunctory. "How are you doing?" I'd ask. "Fine. Busy. Look, I've got to go." When I asked if he'd visit, there was always an excuse. Work was demanding. He was tired. He had plans. 6 months after graduation, Calvin finally agreed to meet me for lunch. That's when I met her, Bianca. Tall, with perfectly styled hair and a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "This is my girlfriend," Calvin said, not even using my name in the introduction. Bianca's smile never reached her eyes as she looked me up and down, taking in my sensible shoes and department store dress. "Calvin has told me so much about you," she said, though her tone suggested none of it had been flattering. Throughout lunch, I noticed how Bianca would whisper in Calvin's ear, how his expression would harden whenever I spoke about family matters or reminisced about his childhood. When I mentioned the loans I was still paying off for his education, Bianca actually rolled her eyes. "You chose to do that," Calvin said flatly. "I never asked you to." The pain of those words was sharp, but I swallowed it down with my lukewarm coffee. Comment if you've ever noticed someone you love slowly changing toward you, that gradual cooling, the subtle pulling away that you try to ignore until you can't anymore. I told myself it was just a phase. That all young men distance themselves from their mothers when they start building their own lives. That Bianca's influence would fade once the honeymoon period of their relationship ended. I made excuses. When Calvin forgot my birthday that year, I told myself he was just busy with his new career. When he didn't call on Christmas, I convinced myself the text message with a generic Merry Christmas was enough. When months passed without seeing him, I blamed his work schedule, not his choices. But deep down I knew. The son who once made me handmade Mother's Day cards, who would call me during college just to tell me about his day, that boy was disappearing, replaced by a cold stranger who seemed to resent my very existence. The birthday dinner wasn't just disappointing. What happened next left me questioning everything about our relationship. Because after Calvin told me he wished I would disappear, after he walked out of my house without so much as a goodbye, I discovered something that turned my heartbreak into something much darker. Are you still with me? Type betrayal in the comments if you want to know what I found. The night after that devastating birthday dinner, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying Calvin's words, "The best gift would be if you just disappeared." How could my own child say something so cruel? The son I had rocked to sleep, nursed through fevers, and sacrificed everything for? I spent the next morning in a daze, mechanically going through the motions of my day. The leftover birthday cake sat untouched on the counter, a sad reminder of a celebration that never happened. I finally threw it away, watching the colorful frosting disappear into the trash. 3 days later, my credit card was declined at the pharmacy when I tried to pick up my blood pressure medication. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harris," the pharmacist said gently. "It says you're over your limit." That couldn't be right. I was always careful with money, a habit born from decades of stretching every dollar. I hadn't made any large purchases recently. When I got home, I called the credit card company. "Yes, Mrs. Harris, your card is maxed out," the representative confirmed. "I'm seeing several large purchases in the past 2 weeks. Nordstrom, $1,200, the Ritz-Carlton, $2,450, Tiffany & Company, $3,800. My heart pounded as she continued listing purchases I'd never made. I'd never even been to a Ritz-Carlton. "Can you tell me where these purchases were made?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The Miami location for the hotel charge. The others were in your home city." Miami. I remembered seeing photos on Calvin's social media. Him and Bianca on a beach, her sporting a new necklace. I asked the representative to send me the detailed transactions, and what I discovered turned my blood cold. A second card had been opened in my name, one I'd never applied for. The billing address was Calvin's apartment. My own son had stolen my identity. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sat at my kitchen table, hands trembling, as I scrolled through charge after charge. Designer clothes. Expensive dinners. A vacation I couldn't afford to take myself. Would you continue to leave your inheritance to someone who betrayed your trust? Who took advantage of the very person who sacrificed everything for them? I had always planned for Calvin to inherit everything I had. My modest house, my small retirement savings, my life insurance policy. It wasn't much by some standards, but it represented a lifetime of hard work. I had assumed my son would appreciate it, maybe even use it to help his own children someday. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Thomas, who had helped me draft my original will years ago. I need to make a change, I told him, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. 2 days later, I sat in his office, signing the new documents. Instead of Calvin, my estate would now go to Children's Memorial Hospital, the place where I'd spent so many years caring for sick children as a nurse. Children who appreciated the smallest kindnesses. Children whose eyes lit up when you entered the room, not darkened with resentment. Are you sure about this, Lorraine? Thomas asked, his kind eyes searching mine for doubt. This is a significant change. I've never been more certain of anything, I replied. As I walked out of that office, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, a deep, throbbing wound that I suspected would never fully heal. But alongside it grew something new, resolve. I would no longer be a doormat for my son's cruelty. I would no longer make excuses for his behavior. I would no longer allow myself to be used. That evening, my phone rang. Calvin's name flashed on the screen. For the first time in our relationship, I let it go to voicemail. His message was telling, "Mom, can you lend me some money? Just a temporary thing. Call me back." No apology. No mention of our last conversation. Just another demand. I deleted the message and blocked his number. If you've ever had to cut someone toxic from your life, even someone you love deeply, hit that subscribe button. We all need support when making these heartbreaking decisions. I thought changing my will would be the hardest thing I'd face. Then my health took an unexpected turn, and everything changed again. Spring arrived with a burst of color in my small garden. After changing my will, I had thrown myself into gardening. Digging my hands into the soil felt therapeutic, a way to nurture something that might actually flourish under my care. Unlike my relationship with Calvin. 3 weeks had passed since I'd blocked his number. 3 weeks of unexpected peace, interrupted only by the occasional anonymous call I suspected was him using another phone. I never answered. That Tuesday morning was unusually warm. I woke early, excited to plant the rose bushes I'd bought on sale. By mid-morning, I was on my knees in the garden, carefully placing each plant in its new home. The first wave of dizziness came suddenly. I steadied myself, blaming the heat and my empty stomach. I'd skipped breakfast in my eagerness to garden. But when I tried to stand, the world tilted violently. My chest tightened, a vice squeezing harder with each breath. I fumbled for my phone, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. The last thing I remember was my neighbor Ellen's voice calling my name as darkness closed in. I woke up in the hospital, the familiar beep of monitors a strange comfort after decades of working among them. Dr. Rivera, a cardiologist I'd worked with years before, stood at my bedside. "Lorraine," he said gently, "you had a minor heart attack. The years of stress have taken a toll." The irony wasn't lost on me. Decades of caring for others had literally broken my heart. "We need to do a procedure," he continued. "Nothing major, a stent. But you'll need someone to help you afterward. Is there family we should call?" I hesitated. There was only Calvin. "My son," I said finally. But we're not close. Ellen, bless her heart, had already tracked down Calvin. He arrived the next day, just hours before my procedure. I'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that seeing me in a hospital bed might soften him. That the prospect of losing his mother might reawaken some buried affection. I should have known better. He stood at the foot of my bed, not bothering to take my hand or kiss my cheek. Bianca wasn't with him. "You look okay," he said, as if disappointed. "I had a heart attack, Calvin." He shrugged. Dr. Rivera said it was minor. The nurse came in to check my vitals, smiling kindly at Calvin. "Your mom's a fighter. She'll be just fine with proper care." After she left, Calvin cleared his throat. "I can't really take time off work right now. Maybe you can hire someone." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. Would the boy I raised, the one who cried when his goldfish died, who made me soup when I had the flu, recognize the man he'd become? "That won't be necessary," I said finally. "Ellen has offered to help." He nodded, relieved. Then, after an awkward silence, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, about your will. Have you updated it recently?" The monitor beside me registered a spike in my heart rate. "I just had a heart attack, and that's what you're worried about?" He had the decency to look embarrassed, but only briefly. "It's just, Bianca and I are planning our future. We need to know what resources we'll have available." Resources. As if I were nothing but a bank account. As if my entire worth could be calculated in dollars and cents. "The will is handled," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You don't need to worry about it." Would you be more concerned about inheritance or recovery if your parent was hospitalized? Drop a broken heart if you're shocked by Calvin's behavior, or 100 points if you've experienced something similar. The procedure went smoothly. 3 days later, I was discharged with strict instructions to rest. Ellen drove me home and helped set up my bedroom downstairs so I wouldn't have to climb stairs. "Calvin should be doing this," she muttered, arranging my medications on the nightstand. I didn't disagree. The first week of recovery passed quietly. Calvin called once, a brief, obligatory check-in that lasted less than 2 minutes. He didn't offer to visit. I didn't ask him to. By the second week, I could move around more easily. The doctors were pleased with my progress. "Your body's responding well," Dr. Rivera told me during my follow-up. "Just keep stress to a minimum." Easier said than done when your only child has broken your heart more thoroughly than any medical condition could. On day 14 of my recovery, as afternoon sunlight streamed through my living room windows, the doorbell rang. Ellen had gone home hours ago. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I made my way to the door and peered through the peephole. Bianca stood on my porch, alone. No Calvin in sight. She kept glancing over her shoulder nervously, as if afraid of being seen. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Lorraine," she said, her perfectly made-up face serious. "We need to talk." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. What she told me next changed everything I thought I knew about my son, and made me realize that Calvin's betrayal ran far deeper than I could have imagined. Bianca perched uncomfortably on the edge of my sofa, her designer purse clutched tightly in her lap. I noticed her manicured nails digging into the expensive leather. Whatever had brought her here had her nervous, terrified, even. "Can I get you something to drink?" I offered, my nurse's instinct to care for others kicking in despite everything. She shook her head. "I can't stay long. Calvin doesn't know I'm here." That got my attention. Why the secrecy? Bianca took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling with the effort. "Calvin isn't who you think he is. He isn't who I thought he was either." I waited, my heart already preparing for another blow. He has a problem, she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Gambling. It started small, sports betting during college. He told me it was just for fun. My mind flashed back to those years, the occasional requests for extra money I'd attributed to normal college expenses. But it's gotten worse. Much worse, Bianca continued. After we started dating, I noticed money disappearing from our joint account. He'd be gone all night and come home agitated. Sometimes flush with cash, more often not. She finally met my eyes. He owes people, Lorraine. Bad people. The kind who don't send reminder notices in the mail. A cold feeling washed over me. How much? Over $80,000. The room seemed to tilt. $80,000. More than I'd managed to save in my entire life. That's why he's been so fixated on your will, your house, Bianca said. He needs money fast. He thought if he could get his hands on your assets. He'd use my life savings to pay off gambling debts, I finished for her. Bianca nodded miserably. I tried to talk him out of it. I told him to get help. But he won't listen. He keeps saying he's one big win away from fixing everything. The pieces clicked into place. The credit card fraud. The cold detachment. The cruel words at my birthday dinner. It wasn't just that Calvin had stopped loving me. He had been actively trying to push me away while simultaneously setting himself up to benefit from my death. My own son. A part of me, the mother who had held him through nightmares, who had kissed scraped knees and checked under the bed for monsters, wanted to rush to his rescue. To fix this problem like I'd fixed so many others. But another part, the part that had finally started to protect myself, recognized the manipulation, the danger. Do you think addiction excuses treating family cruelly? Would you risk everything to save someone who had deliberately hurt you? I needed to decide, and quickly. Why are you telling me this? I asked Bianca. Why now? Her hand moved to her stomach in a gesture so instinctive I almost missed its significance. I'm pregnant, she whispered. 8 weeks. Calvin doesn't know yet. My grandchild. A tiny life unaware of the chaos surrounding it. For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Perhaps a baby would change things. Perhaps becoming a father would give Calvin the motivation to get help, to become the man I'd raised him to be. We could help him, I said cautiously. Find a treatment program. Work out a payment plan for his debts. Bianca's expression changed, pity mixed with something else. Guilt? There's more you need to know, she said, looking away. About Calvin. About us. The pregnancy news gave me hope for a moment, until I discovered an even deeper betrayal. One that would change everything I thought I knew about my son and the woman carrying my grandchild. The thing is. Bianca hesitated, twisting her diamond ring. Calvin thinks your will is already changed back in his favor. I frowned. Why would he think that? Because I told him I convinced you. She met my eyes directly now. After your heart attack, I told him I visited you in the hospital when he wasn't there. That I played the devoted future daughter-in-law and you fell for it. The cruelty of the deception stole my breath. They'd been planning, plotting, even as I lay recovering from a heart attack. And he believed you. Just like that. He wants to believe it, she said. He needs to believe it. Something about her story didn't add up. The timing was off. And this sudden confession. Why now? I studied Bianca more carefully. The expensive clothes. The perfect makeup. The manicured hand that kept touching her supposedly pregnant belly. When did you say you visited me in the hospital? I asked casually. Last Tuesday afternoon. Around 3. I nodded slowly. That's interesting. Because I was in surgery at 3 on Tuesday. And visitors were restricted to family only, which is why even Ellen couldn't come in. Bianca's face paled beneath her makeup. You never visited me, I said. Just like you're not pregnant. Her hand dropped from her stomach as if burned. I don't know what. Please, I interrupted. I was a nurse for 30 years. I've seen morning sickness, Bianca. I've seen the fatigue, the subtle changes. You're showing none of them. Tears filled her eyes, real ones this time, not the calculated ones she'd used earlier. Calvin said you'd help us if you thought there was a baby. That you'd change your will back. That you'd give us money to prepare for the baby's arrival. The final piece of my heart that had held out hope for my son shattered. How much of what you told me is true? I asked. The gambling debts? That part's real, she admitted. Too real. Those men came to our apartment last week. They threatened him, threatened me too. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt oddly calm, as if I were watching the scene from somewhere outside my body. And you thought lying about a pregnancy was the solution? Bianca looked down. Calvin thought it would work. He said you were always so desperate for grandchildren. There it was, the final manipulation. Using my deepest wish against me. What's the worst lie someone has told you to get what they wanted? Have you ever had your own dreams used as weapons against you? Leave a comment below. I asked Bianca to leave. As I showed her to the door, a thought occurred to me. Does Calvin know you came here today? She shook her head. He thinks I'm at a spa appointment. Don't tell him, I said. About this conversation. Something in my tone made her look at me sharply. What are you going to do? I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Nothing for you to worry about. After she left, I sat in my quiet house for a long time. The people I'd believed were my family, my only family, had plotted to manipulate me at my most vulnerable. They had invented a grandchild. They had preyed on my loneliness, my love, my desire to help. No more. In that moment, a plan began to form. Not born from anger, though I certainly felt that burning inside me. Not even from hurt, though the pain was nearly unbearable. This plan came from clarity. From finally seeing my son for who he truly was, not who I desperately wanted him to be. I decided to give Calvin and Bianca exactly what they wanted, or so they thought. I waited exactly 1 month before putting my plan into action. 1 month of pretending to recover, of sounding weak and vulnerable during Calvin's occasional check-in calls. 1 month of laying the groundwork. I've been thinking about what you said, I told Calvin during one of these calls. About my will. I could practically hear him sitting up straighter, his interest piqued. I want to make sure everything's in order, I continued. Especially after this health scare. Would you and Bianca come for dinner next Friday? My birthday. Your birthday. Calvin repeated, confusion evident in his voice. Our last birthday dinner hadn't exactly gone well. I'm turning 58, I said softly. After what happened, I'd like to have family around me. He agreed quickly, too quickly. I knew what he was thinking, that I'd softened, that I was lonely and afraid after my heart attack. That I was finally ready to be manipulated. I spent the next week preparing. I cooked the same meal as before, honey-glazed chicken, macaroni and cheese, sweet potato pie, a deliberate echo of the night he told me he wished I would disappear. I bought another expensive bottle of wine I couldn't really afford. But this time, I also invited a special guest. When the doorbell rang at precisely 6 o'clock, I smoothed down my dress, a new one purchased for the occasion, and took a deep breath. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My heart, mended by both surgery and resolve, beat steady and strong. Calvin and Bianca arrived dressed impeccably, as always. Calvin carried flowers, a half-hearted bouquet that still had the grocery store price tag attached. Bianca wore a loose-fitting top, I noticed with grim amusement. Still playing the pregnancy card. "Mom," Calvin said, leaning in for an awkward hug. "You look better." "Amazing what modern medicine can do," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." I watched them exchange glances as they entered the dining room. The good china was out, candles lit, 3 place settings arranged. "Are we expecting someone else?" Bianca asked. "My lawyer," I said lightly. "Thomas should be here any minute." Calvin's smile faltered. "Your lawyer? Why would you invite him to a family dinner?" "Oh, I thought it would be nice," I said, busying myself with the wine. "He's been so helpful with updating my will." The doorbell rang again. Perfect timing. Thomas was a kind man in his 60s who had handled my legal affairs for years. He understood exactly what I was doing and why. He'd seen too many elderly clients manipulated by greedy relatives to judge my actions. As we ate, I kept the conversation deliberately mundane. I asked about their jobs, about the weather, about movies they'd seen recently. Calvin grew increasingly impatient, shooting glances at Thomas, clearly wondering when we'd get to the topic he cared about. Finally, as I served dessert, Calvin cleared his throat. "So, Mom, you mentioned you were updating your will?" I set down the pie server and folded my hands in my lap. "Yes, that's right." Calvin leaned forward eagerly. "And?" I allowed myself a small smile. "And it's done." "Done," he repeated. "Completely finalized," I said, nodding toward Thomas. "Thomas has been such a help." "That's great," Calvin said, struggling to contain his excitement. Beside him, Bianca's hand drifted to her stomach in that now familiar fake gesture. "So, what does it say?" I took a sip of wine, savoring the moment. I decided it was time to make sure my assets go to someone who truly values them. Calvin nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. Family should stay with family." "I couldn't agree more," I said. I raised my glass. "I'd like to make a toast." They raised their glasses, expectant. "To Children's Memorial Hospital," I said clearly. "The recipients of my entire estate." The silence that followed was deafening. Calvin's face froze, his glass suspended midair. Bianca's smile cracked at the edges. "What?" Calvin finally managed. "My house, my savings, my insurance policy. All of it is going to the hospital where I worked for so many years," I explained calmly. "To help children who appreciate kindness. Who don't use people. Who don't lie about pregnancies to manipulate a lonely woman." Bianca's glass slipped from her fingers, spilling red wine across the white tablecloth. She didn't even notice. "You knew," she whispered. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady. "The gambling debts. The credit card fraud. The lies. All of it." Calvin's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I can," I replied. "And I did. Weeks ago, actually. Tonight was just to see your faces when you realized that your plan failed. That I'm not the weak, desperate mother you can manipulate anymore." Do you think revenge is ever justified when someone has repeatedly hurt you? Or should we always turn the other cheek, even to those who have shown they don't deserve our kindness? Calvin slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You have no idea what you've done." Thomas started to intervene, but I held up my hand. This was my moment, my stand. "No, Calvin," I said. "You have no idea what you've done. You destroyed the only real thing of value you ever had, a mother's love. Their expressions when I announced my decision were just the beginning. What happened next would change all our lives forever. Calvin and Bianca stormed out of my house that night, leaving the dinner table in disarray, wine spilled, chairs overturned, Thomas looking stunned at the display of raw fury. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked after they'd gone. I nodded, surprised to find I truly was. For the first time in years, I think I am. I didn't hear from Calvin for 3 weeks after the dinner. I assumed he was licking his wounds, plotting his next move. I half expected more credit card fraud or perhaps a lawsuit contesting the will, though Thomas assured me it would be futile. What I didn't expect was the phone call from a detective. "Mrs. Harris? This is Detective Powell with the Financial Crimes Unit. I need to ask you some questions about your son, Calvin Harris." My stomach dropped. What's happened? The story unfolded over the next several days. Calvin's gambling debts hadn't just led him to steal from me. He'd been embezzling from clients at his financial firm for months. After our confrontation dinner, desperate and cornered, he'd made a massive, unauthorized transfer from a client's account, hoping for a quick gambling win to fix everything. He lost it all in a single night. When the firm discovered the missing funds, they contacted the police immediately. Calvin was arrested at his desk, led out in handcuffs past stunned co-workers. I visited him once at the county jail before his trial. He sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit, his eyes hollow, his hands fidgeting constantly. "Did you come to gloat?" he asked bitterly. "No," I said honestly. "I came to understand." "Understand what?" "When it went wrong," I said. "When the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard turned into a man who could look his mother in the eye and say he wished she would disappear." He had no answer for that. The court showed little mercy. Financial crimes against trusting clients, elder abuse against his own mother. The judge called it a pattern of predatory behavior showing profound moral corruption. Calvin was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Bianca didn't even attend the trial. By then, she'd already moved on, to another financial advisor at the same firm, ironically. When I ran into her months later at the grocery store, she pretended not to see me, hurrying down another aisle with her new boyfriend in tow. Do you believe in karma when it comes to family betrayal? That those who hurt the people who loved them most will eventually face consequences for their actions? Leave your thoughts in the comments. With Calvin in prison and the drama finally behind me, I found myself at loose ends. My house felt too quiet, my days too empty. The anger that had fueled me had burned out, leaving behind a hollow question: now what? The answer came unexpectedly, when I visited Children's Memorial to finalize some details about my estate donation. Walking through those familiar halls, I felt a tug of nostalgia for my nursing days. "We're always looking for volunteers," the volunteer coordinator told me when I mentioned my background. "Especially people with medical experience who can comfort the children and explain things at their level." That weekend, I found myself reading stories to children in the oncology ward. Their faces lit up when I entered the room, their small hands reaching for mine without judgment or calculation. Just pure connection. Soon, I was volunteering 3 days a week. I learned every child's name, their favorite books, which stuffed animals comforted them during procedures. I held their hands during scary moments and celebrated their victories, no matter how small. While Calvin faced the consequences of his actions, I discovered something unexpected about myself. Something that would change the course of my remaining years and bring meaning to a life I once thought had been wasted on ungrateful love. I'm 62 now. It's been 5 years since I changed my will, for since Calvin went to prison. He was released early for good behavior last year. We haven't spoken. Sometimes I see him around town, at the grocery store, the gas station. We acknowledge each other with a nod, like distant acquaintances who once shared a class rather than mother and son who shared a life. It hurts, but in a dull way now, like an old injury that aches when it rains. What surprised me most about these years wasn't the pain, it was the joy I discovered in its wake. The children at the hospital gave me purpose when I thought I had none left. They taught me that love doesn't have to be complicated or conditional. A 6-year-old fighting leukemia showed me more courage than I'd ever known. A 10-year-old with cystic fibrosis taught me to find humor in the darkest moments. These children, who had every reason to be bitter, chose joy instead. They became my teachers, my inspiration, and yes, in many ways, my family. Last month, the hospital dedicated a new reading room in my name, the Lorraine Harris Healing Library. Children gather there daily, finding escape in stories when their bodies need rest. Watching them, I realized something profound. Family isn't defined by blood or obligation. It's created through genuine care and mutual respect. The inheritance Calvin lost will help these children for generations to come. My house will be sold after I'm gone, the proceeds funding treatments for families who can't afford them. My life insurance will establish a scholarship for young nurses. Nothing was wasted. Not my love, not my pain, not even my betrayal. Has letting go of a toxic relationship ever brought you unexpected happiness? Have you discovered that sometimes the family we choose brings more joy than the family we're born into? The hardest lesson I learned was this: sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is walking away from those who only value what you can give them, not who you are. If this story touched you, subscribe for more real stories about family, betrayal, and finding strength. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have forgiven Calvin, or made the same choice I did? Let's meet in the comments. I'm curious which city you're watching from and what part of my journey resonated with you most.